Hello viewers, I am Nehal Farooquee from School of Extension and Development Studies with experience on environmental issues of Indian Himalaya and development studies. Today we are going to discuss participation in policy and planning. This is part of approaches to sustainable development. Now before we move further and start discussing that what are the various approaches, I believe you all must have heard or you all must be getting in series about approaches in the natural resource management, watershed management. These are the separate units of this particular block, and participation in policy and planning is the last unit of this block. Now, before we start about participation in policy planning, let's try to understand what does this word participation mean. Now, participation with regard to people's participation, we are discussing today here. Now, participation means taking part. Now, taking part means when you are participating or you are a part of a particular program or a particular action or a particular development activity. So that is the meaning of participation. In that context of policy and planning, participation means direct involvement of all those people in decision making process which is likely to affect their lives. Now here we are going to discuss participation of people in the management of natural resources. Like we all know that natural resources either in the rural areas or in the forested areas are there, and the community residing besides that natural resource base or near a forest, they utilize those resources. Now that management is done by people themselves. They participate in making certain decisions. So by people's participation is an example that how traditionally these communities residing in the far-flung areas of forested areas or in a remote rural areas, they have evolved this technique of management of natural resources where there is an equitable sharing of resources, the grievances are addressed, they also resolve the mutual conflict arising in the sharing of these resources. So in people's participation, we are going to understand, we are going to see all these components relating to natural resource management. Now the way participation is defined, that largely depends upon the context and background in which participation is applied. Now participation, if it is as I discussed earlier, if it is relating to natural resource management by a traditional community, it has a different context of understanding. Now participation in an activity, group activity by a group of students or a board of faculty or a group of scientists, so there the context is slightly different. Overall, FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization in 1982, they have emphasized that participation in all decision making process but by the people's own organization and through self-organization is the best form of participation. What we find in the traditional institutions, traditional panchayat level organizations, traditional tribal communities, the way they have evolved this method of participation and sharing of resources, so that is commendable, and we should learn example from such participation. Now before we move further, let's try to understand what are the different types of participation. Now as we all know that if you are a party to a particular program or a particular thing, that is the participation. Now it can be categorized into various stages in in which degree of involvement varies, and the typology of participation are passive participation. Why I am discussing all this? Because when you are trying to understand the approaches to sustainable development, so if overall understanding of community, their psyche, their participation, their governance, their developmental methods, if we link all these, then you will be in a better position to understand and correlate that how various approaches to sustainable development is more apt, and those traditional communities, those poor or rural people who are residing in the remote areas, how they have, without any formal education, how they have sustained their resource base. That is sustainable resource base, that because of the sustainable method of harnessing, method of using. So before that, we all have to understand the various concepts. Now we all know the meaning of participation. Now first is the passive participation. What is passive part? As it is very clear from the word passive, here it means the target group, it just listens. They are there, they don't take certain decisions, they are party to the developmental program or an ongoing activity, but they just participate without giving their viewpoint, without any decision making. So passive participation at one end of the spectrum is the very, it is not a negative, but it's not very positive of form of participation, because the target group is not very active. Whereas on the other spectrum of this participation level, there is self-mobilization. Now self-mobilization is the highest form of participation, where a group of people, they mobilize themselves, they try to take all the decisions, they take all the initiatives, either in the management of the natural resources or in the activity, or if they have a particular grievances, if they want to push through their demand to a particular organization. So there they mobilize themselves and they form a group, and there the external factor is very limited. Our entire decision is done by the group themselves. So at the other end of the spectrum, we find self-mobilization, that is the highest form of participation. Now between this passive and self-mobilization, passive participation and self-mobilization, we have 4-5 more types of participation. That is participation in information giving, participation by consultation, participation by material incentives, functional participation, interactive participation. Now these different types of participation, one finds that as you move from passive form of participation to self-mobilization, the control of local people increases and the outsiders' control decreases. Now this is just a brief understanding of different levels of participation. Now what are the importance of people's participation? Let's try to understand that what is the importance. If people do not participate, then what is going to happen? If people participate, then what are the problems that will arise because of their participation? So the importance of people's participation is a very important component in approaches to sustainable. If we are trying to understand approaches to sustainable development, then people's participation in decision making is a very important component. Now most people want to be involved. People have intrinsic desire to get involved in any development program or any form of activity where they are, if either they are getting direct benefits or they accrue some kind of informal or indirect benefit from that activity. So that is the intrinsic desire of human being to participate in that activity. People also have right to be involved, because if a particular developmental program is for the people, then they have full right to be involved, and people have the legal entitlement to be involved. Say, let's take an example, a community residing besides a forest patch or an alpine meadow, a grazing land. Now, for the development of that alpine meadow, if development is going to happen without the participation of people, then it will be something where people will be at the loser end. So, their involvement is very important in order to utilize in order to give a most practical decision about the utilization of that particular resource base. So, the rights and their entitlement is very important because they have the traditional right over those resource base. Let us take another example, that if there is a water spring, I am giving some of the examples from the mountainous community where people's participation is very well defined, and they have the traditional communities of mountain, coastal, arid region, semi-arid region, where there is a common resource pool or common resource base, and people share those resource base. The importance of people's participation is well acclaimed, well defined, and it is very well understood by the people that how and in what way they will take certain decision which will not affect the resource base, which will not arise, that will not arise conflict between two groups or two individuals. So, these examples are very important. Now, before we move further, let us try to see that people have, as I discussed earlier, that they have the legal entitlement to be involved in a development program, the rights to redress, to comment and to be consulted on issues impacting their lives and society, because that resource base or common resource pool or common forest or common water point, or let us take a well, a common well of a village. Now, any development in and around the resource base, that is the water of that well, will affect the people who are utilizing, who are the beneficiary of that water. So, they have to be consulted in any decision either for the development or for the utilization of that water base. So, people's participation is very important when it comes to development, when it comes to participation of people in the resource, when we try to understand and analyze the people's participation. Now, participation has accountability also. Accountability means what we call not just being responsive, but also answerable to the people. If I am accountable to my job, my work, my profession, that means I am also answerable if I am doing something not correct or not good or not efficient. So, I am answerable. So, accountable, when we say accountability, it is also answerability. I am answerable to the higher ups, to the people. And here when we talk of people's participation, people are answerable to the community. People have right to know what is happening and why. Increased direct involvement of service users results in more efficient or effective accountability of service providers. Now, participation makes more efficient and cost effective services. How? Let us take an example that there is a resource base. Let us take a resource example of a forest patch again. Now, because of illegal felling illegal felling of the trees or cutting of the resource forest or grazing of the underneath forest, we find that resource will deplete one day because of over harnessing, over utilizing of that resource. Now, in order to make the efficient and cost effective service which that ecosystem, forest ecosystem is providing, it is better to utilize this and give back to the what we call the effective decision in the management of that resource base. So, involve people in such a way that take more efficient decision, like if people have to make efficient and cost effective services then no need to barbed wire or do what we call barricading of resource base. We have to just legislate, we have to just discuss with people that on certain days they would come to utilize the resources, and which are the group of people who can cut the harness or take the minimum or minor forest produced from that resource base. So, cost effective services are and efficient management is very important component. Now involve people in institutionalized discrimination. Next is that what are the various perspectives of participation. Food and Agriculture Organization, again I am giving you example that FAO is the first because they were dealing with various projects in Africa, Asia and African countries where the common resource base or the agriculture relating activities were being documented, development programs which involved people were being understood or being those development projects were in swing. So they have documented and they have given certain perspectives of participation. The functional participation. Now to increase efficiency and effectiveness of research and development. So this is the functional participation. If people are going to be part of function of utilizing of the resource base, so that means or a R&D program, if people are going to be the part of that development program, so the efficiency of the and effectiveness of that their suggestion would be much better. Empowering participation to increase the interdependence, awareness and capacity of marginalized groups. That means those marginalized groups, if we increase their independence, if we increase their awareness, so they will be more empowered. So empowering participation means either giving them knowledge or giving them power or giving them authority to utilize. So that way empowering participation is one of the important perspectives of participation. Then philosophical participation. This allows alternative viewpoints also to be understood by the people who are dependent or who are beneficiary of a development project. Now the way they are participating in harnessing and utilizing a development resource base, now they know only one type of the way they are utilizing. But if alternative method or alternative expression viewpoint is allowed, is given to them, so they would be in a better position to judge or to compare whether that alternative is better or what they are, the way they are participating in the utilization of resource base, that is better. So philosophical participation is very important because it allows expression of alternative viewpoints, which is very important for the sustainability of a resource base. Then participation as a process. What happens that when people participate in a particular development program, it is because of they become a process. There is an involvement of local people in implementation of externally designed initiative. They are the parts of the process, but the program has been designed by an external initiative or someone what we call the top-down approach. Decision was done somewhere else and people are only participating as a process because it concerns them, their resource utilization or their developmental program. Now participation as an end. This is the last important perspective which FAO has developed, which FAO has documented, that participation as a goal of a policy initiative entails empowering people in terms of their acquiring skills, knowledge, experience to take greater responsibility for their development. So when participation is the end, that means without their participation nothing can be done, no developmental activities can be further or it cannot move ahead. So this becomes very important because here as a goal for the policy initiative entails empowering the people. Now after having understood people's participation, let's try to understand what is policy and planning, because for the approaches to sustainable development, what we are going to discuss, people's participation in policy and planning. And now we have seen various facets, various components of various forms of people's participation, and I have given you concrete examples from mountainous region, from the tribal communities, from the common resource base where community depend on a natural resource base and they share the resources. Now what is policy planning? In the broader sense, policy covers all actions related to management, organization and planning of scientific and technical resources and activities. That, see, resource is one, activity is two, management is three. Now these are the three different components, and in a broader sense it covers all these components, that the management, planning, technical resources and activities, whether carried out by either by a government organization, public sector, or a private sector, private enterprises, or a corporate agency, or a peasant farmer, or a community, whether they deal with formal science-based research or incremental technical changes at the level of a specific farm or community. So that means policy is a broader sense of actions that relates to management of an organization and planning, scientific and technical resources and activities. These are the 4-5 components which is directly involved in policy and planning. Now, two important components, two important concepts are very important: policy sciences and public policy study. Let's try to understand what is policy sciences framework. Now, this particular policy science framework is one approach to understand and guide the choice of public policies and the strategies for getting them enacted. That means for a particular area or for a particular developmental project, what kind of policy is best suited, and to understand this, a particular way, a particular method is applied, and that is what we call policy sciences. Public policy study is a much broader term that covering many approaches to policy analysis. Now, the distinctiveness of policy science framework is that it insists on all of the following, what we call analytic commitments that needs to be incorporated. So, public policy study is a much broader compared to policy science, which involves only for the choice of decision making for the public policies, whereas public policy is the study. Now, before we move further, we try to understand that there are certain development components like coordination, cooperation, collaboration. Now, the key sources for development approaches to sustainability are the development in resource management, environmental planning, and that focus on integrated forms of resource planning. So that means if we want to understand sustainable approaches to sustainability or sustainable development, so when it comes to empirical or practical aspect of a community or a people where they are utilizing a resource base, a community, so these three components, that is coordination, cooperation and collaboration, becomes very important. Without these three, understanding these three components, it is not possible to move further. Let's try to see what these three components means. Now, integrated approaches are neither top-down, where goals at each level in the organization are determined based on the goals at the next higher level. That means decision is not top-down approach. Decision is not done somewhere else. It gradually evolves with the community, and it is based on the goals at the next higher level. After completion of first level of achieving first level of decision or implementing first level of decision, they move to the next higher level. Nor it is bottom up, that it does not evolve from the community where goals of each single individual is aggregated and put together. No. Instead, integrated planning may be regarded as an interactive or collaborative approach which requires participation and interaction across various levels of organization or units of governance between responsible organization and stakeholders in the planning process to realize horizontal and vertical aspirations within the planning process. So, the basic way of successful linkages are coordination, cooperation and collaboration for sustainable approaches to development or utilization of a resource base. Further, what does coordination refer to? It refers to formal institutionalized relationship among existing networks of organization. What does that mean? Formal institutionalized relationship among existing networks of organization. Interests and individuals and the results of these is called coordination, which can prove extremely difficult, especially when there is a large number of parties involved in decision making process. So, if there is a good coordination, good cooperation, good collaboration, that means there is a very good sync, very good understanding between different stakeholders and the end objective, that is the sustainability at the one end. At the other end, if that clarity in mind is there, so that is the best approach to sustainability, where the linkages or interactive contacts between two or more actors, collaborative efforts, intermittent coordination, mutual adjustment of the policies and procedure of two or more actors to accomplish such objectives. Now let's conclude portion 1, where we have discussed about participation, various perspectives of participation, forms of participation and various roles of coordination, cooperation, collaboration, that in what way our understanding of people's participation in policy and cooperation, collaboration help in developing our understanding of various approaches to sustainability. So, I hope, dear student, you must have understood, or you will be in a better position to correlate the roles of coordination, cooperation, collaboration and participation of people in managing their resource base, in enhancing their understanding of resource utilization for better approach to sustainability. Thank you.